Good morning and welcome to another edition of Account-Based Friday, an early edition. And we're really excited to join special guest Ernest Owusu out of San Francisco and Sixth Sense. He's got a unique title, the head of sales development and transformation of Sixth Sense. I can't wait to dive into this conversation. Let me just orient you around before we get started. First of all, my co-host Meg ran Serious Decisions Research, former CMO as well. She and I have done over close to 300 of these videos of go-to-market strategies, of best practices. And in the upper corner, depending on how my camera's mirrored today, in the upper right-hand corner, there's a QR code that'll bring you to those videos of best practices. So if you're struggling with growth or account-based, or now in this case, SDR, all you have to do is look at that QR code, click on it. It'll bring you right to our YouTube channel. Of course, if you have any questions, something specific, you can always ping Meg or I, and we can orient you to that as well. Today's conversation is really going to be an exciting one. We're going to talk all things SDR, the future proofing of SDRs, and I can't think of a better person to represent that conversation than Ernest. And full disclosure, he is a Cal football player. Therefore, I'm wearing my Cal jersey. And you can't really see it, but my Cal t-shirt as well, which still fits from a few years ago. So I'm pretty excited about that. I don't know if the audience would share that same excitement, but let me pull up here our weekly poll. So each week we do a poll, and this week's poll, we talked about the role of AI and SDRs. And let me take two steps back. First of all, I created this poll in reaction to a comment that I heard that somebody said, oh, SDRs are being lazy because AI is going to make them lazier. And I think, and I've said this before, I think it's the most challenging role in the organization to be an SDR. You have to assimilate a lot of information very quickly, and you're assimilating voice, data, information to hopefully connect with somebody on a call. And you provide enough value in a very short amount of time. So when I did this poll, I asked the question of, does AI make somebody lazier or smarter? I had checked smarter because I do think that in every AI solution that I'm seeing these days, there's a human element involved. AI is not going off on its own. It's not replacing people. I don't think it'll replace people. I think there's still going to be some sort of person oversight. But Meg, what was your reaction to this role, to this poll when you saw it?
I'm in the minority here. I picked other. I don't think tools make people smarter or less smart or lazier or less lazy. I think it depends on how they're used. So I would say it depends, right? And it's more to do with, is this person set up for success with the resources that they're given and the training that they have and the goals that are set for them, or aren't they? And the tool then becomes a means to an end, but in and of itself, it doesn't change the person or the role. It's more how it's used. So that was my vote, but we're super excited, Ernest, that you're here today because there's so much discussion right now around the role of the SDR, the efficacy of the SDR role in general, and of course the technology that's coming along to help that role, or in some cases people are talking about it replacing that role. So we're excited. I think you've got one of the more interesting and compelling titles I've seen in a while, which is Head of Sales Development Transformation. And if ever there was a moment for that, it's now. But maybe we kick things off with you telling us a little bit about how you came to be in that role and kind of your journey and your background. And then I'd love to get your definition of SDR.
Yeah, definitely. So hi, everyone. Again, my name is Ernest. And I guess my background is, so as mentioned earlier, I went to Cal, played football there, an amazing experience. Afterwards, I was uniquely blessed, I'd say, to get the opportunity to play professionally in the NFL for a number of years. I played for the Minnesota Vikings and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I always tell people that the NFL stands for not for long, unfortunately. So my career was not long. It was great. It was just a little bit as long as I wanted to be. So when I finished, I had no idea what I was going to do. And interestingly enough, a lot of the qualities that allowed me to get that level like directly translate into a career in sales. So I took a leap of faith and joined a company as an SDR where I was an SDR for a period of time, then an account executive. Then I built my first SDR team, scaled that to about 20 individuals. And then after that, I had the opportunity to join 6 Sense, where I built our team from roughly 4 or 5 SDRs to just south of 60 as we grew from call about 10 million ARR to just south of 250. So where I'm at right now in terms of head of sales development transformation, as you can imagine, being at 6 Sense, I've been very close to our product team as we built and scaled our team, as we've developed our product. So a lot of my focus now is first and foremost, essentially making sure the lights stay on, if you want to call it, with our SDR function. So I work very closely with a lot of my former reports on make sure the strategy and essentially how we're developing through time is in lockstep with the market. The second thing is, again, on the product side, there's a lot that is evolving in B2B. I think at times is very trendy, if you want to call it. So just making sure our product team is aware of what's going on, how the market is driving pipeline, and we're baking that into our product is a second component. And then the last piece is the awesome thing, again, about having the experience of building a team from nothing to something to what it is right now. I talk to a lot of our customers around like what it looks like to build a great team, like how to hire, how to build operations, how to build that operating model, how to get the operating rhythm for success. So I'm definitely not your typical operator in the sense that like I'm just only driving quota for my SDR function, but I have a more holistic view and a broader impact on the organization through my role.
I think that's a very contemporary kind of leadership role, right? It's integrative. It's a combination of strategic and operational. Super interesting, and I think good for you and for 6 Sense for thinking creatively about the right kinds of leadership roles to have in place, as opposed to just sort of the straight up traditional, drive performance at all costs. But with that in mind, I'd be curious. You saw our poll and thinking about the role of the SDR, like you talked about, what do we need to do to make sure that they're prepared for the future? How are you in 6 Sense defining that role now? What is the expected contribution to the business, and how would you characterize the people that are part of your team?
Yeah, definitely. So I will always say this, and I vehemently believe that the SDR function is not going away. And the main reason why is because it's not just the aspect of driving revenue, it's also talent. So the number one and number two contribution, I'd say almost equally, is are you hiring the right people that eventually can be the sellers of your future? And are you building a team that's able to capture demand and convert that into revenue? So the reason why I overemphasize the word capture is because a lot of different companies have different motions. You could be lead focused, it could be channel focused, it could be purely outbound. The goal and success of an SDR function is finding those pockets and converting them through different outbound methods, through talking to leads at trade shows, whatever it may be. So for us, we have a lot of different channels that we capitalize on, and our team is laser focused on those. And as a result, we're still seeing a lot of great results, and the win rates are high with the SDR function because we are very innovative in how we're attacking those, and as a result, we win.
Yeah, it makes sense about a lot of the trends that you're seeing there, given your history of building the team from scratch and building it up. Just thinking about the different channels and the different outreach capabilities. You've got phone, you've got social, you've got AI. Where do you see that blend kind of currently, and where do you see it evolving to? And I ask that because it's always the clickbaity titles of outbound is dead, AI is replacing the organization, which you kind of already addressed. But where do you see that mix for an SDR function?
Yeah, so I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, and the one thing that has always been true, and I know that when this whole AI trend fizzles out to a certain degree and we kind of see the most that we can from it, I always firmly believe that what you're doing right now does not work 6 months later from now. And I think that for some reason, people are starting to think a little bit differently about that. I think the role, if you look at what an SDR is doing, at the end of the day, our main goal is to drive pipeline, create revenue, right? And how we're doing that right now is very different from what we did in the past. So think of an example of an SDR team that does cold outreach through email, right? In the past, when I was an SDR, you could just take a HubSpot template off of Google and just copy and paste that, and you would get meetings from that, right? And that's how you saw companies like Outreach and Sales Off evolve to the point where they made a lot of money, had a lot of customers, et cetera. Those companies are still working really well, but if you think about that approach, that is very different from what we're doing right now. Right? Like if you think about even just, for example, email, the main principle was an 80-20 rule where you basically had 80% of the email was templated, 20% was personalized, and that was very effective. Right now with our team, with our emails, we have no automation in our emails. And again, that's very different from most teams because we've realized through time that because there's been so much out there in terms of the volume of emails and the automation that teams are sending, the only way that we can cut through the noise is if we specifically manually write our emails at scale, right? And if you think about that, we have seen like very noticeable drops in the volume of emails that our individual BDRs are seeing, but through that effort, we've doubled our reply rates. So I even think about, just email, for example, I actually did a study on this early this year. Q2 of last year, we sent about 26,000 emails, and I forget our exact reply rate, but it was called like a 1.8 or 2% reply rate, right? We changed this model to only sending personalized emails. As a result, Q2 of this year, 10,000 fewer emails, double our reply rate. And the thing is, when you think about this SDR function and how it's evolving with AI, those kinds of things you have to be thinking about and innovating with, because we're not getting impacted by the low email response rates that most companies are, because we changed the way we were doing things, right? So from my perspective, the traditional approach of like, you have a team that does a ton of emails and a ton of calls and they do social selling, some of that stuff does still work, but you have to evolve how you're doing that. And because we've seen consistently that specifically with email, response rates from opens, clicks, replies have gone down, we've actually changed our team to be a lot more phone centric and social centric as opposed to email, because we know that, like, yes, we're still winning there, but the market is changing. You have to find ways to evolve. So that's when you start seeing different technologies like an Orem coming in place, and there are a lot of more social listening tools out there to make sure the team is capturing on data. And if you don't have a team at the very minimum right now, just purely based upon the response rates from opens and clicks from emails, if you don't have a team right now that's at least thinking about making themselves better through the phone or through social, there's a pretty good chance, again, just purely off the response rates, that you will be left behind and you will not be ready to evolve as the market is responding to outreach from SDRs.
Super interesting about the increased focus on phone, because I think for a lot of us, we think, who even answers the phone? Like, how does that work? So I'm curious to know, like, how did you kind of realize that phone is perhaps an emerging channel again? And what kinds of things are you encouraging your team to do to make it work?
Yeah, so the phone has never really, it's never really gone away. I think people just shied away from it because email was so effective. But then again, we're always inspecting everything across the team. And then we saw those trends in response rates going down. We said, okay, we have to adjust through time. So again, the phone is not dead. I still believe firmly, even though just candidly, I don't answer my phone very often, that our prospects do respond to that channel. So the way we're evolving that is actually very interestingly enough. We're not taking the approach of just purely giving the team a list of, in-market accounts and hot leads from events, but similar to what a lot of teams do with email, we're actually applying that practice to the phone. And what I mean by that is, in terms of the focus and personalization that we're using for our cadences and sequences, we apply it to our phone list. So a great example of this is we have our team using Orem, which is an amazing power dialer. Highly encourage you all. I know a lot of SDR leaders right now are buying power dialers, but we'll use Orem, and our KPI on the week is at least 400 dials, right? Fortunately, with power dials like Orem, you can cut through those pretty quickly, and it's not very much of a tough task for the team. But very similar to the past, where you had an SDR team that said, I want you to do 400 emails per week, and 300 of them are automated, and 100 of those are personalized. We applied that principle on the phone. So, and what that looks like in the form of a list is, we'll use 6 Sense to say, show me in-market accounts, show me accounts that have our competitors are hiring, all these different plays, if you want to call it. And we use data to inform the strength of those lists based upon those plays. We enable the team on how to make those calls and then execute on that, and they have high success. That's the 300 to 400. The other 100 is purely based upon them. It's like, show me someone with a lost opportunity. Show me someone who is following our company on LinkedIn. Show me a contact that we spoke to at a trade show. So they're individually tasked with finding those 100 individuals on a weekly basis, and they call down those lists as well. So there are aspects of using AI to make sure those lists have like the right phone numbers. We're only calling mobile numbers and direct lines to make sure there's actually efficiency with that. But I've also noticed, specifically very similar to what you see with an automated approach versus personalized, the lists that we generate as managers does work and has a high result, but still far more effective are the ones that they're creating on their own. Like more connects, more meetings. And I'm not, it makes sense in theory, but I don't think teams are thinking about building their lists like that. And we actually did a study on this just because we kind of changed things in this manner this past quarter. From Q1 to Q2 of this last year, the number of meetings we generated through phone stayed relatively flat in conjunction with our headcount. When we changed this approach, we literally 3x the volume of meetings generated through phone, because we're taking the exact same approach that we took with cadences and applying it to the phone. So, and again, this is something that I have not talked to very many teams that they're doing, and we're having a lot of success with it. So we're going to double down on it again. But that kind of gives me a hunch that there's something about what worked really well with the cadence structure that you have to apply to a power dollar to get the same kind of results.
That's pretty amazing responsiveness too. And what you were saying even earlier about what you think is going to work now, 6 months from now isn't going to work. And it also sounds like you've got a lot of tools for your team to kind of dial in. It brings up a question, and you come from this background of NFL training, like you train a lot for game day. How do you train, or what have you seen evolution wise of training of that function of SDRs into a productive role when you've got all these variables that are switching around?
That's an interesting question, because I hear a lot of teams talking about, like, I have a lot of tech, there's a lot of systems, a lot of processes, like how I enable the team. Fortunately, with tech and systems, there also has an increase in efficiency and efficacy, right? We think about the old days of an SDR function where a typical ramp time was 3 to 4 months. Right now, because of technology, you can cut that down in half. So I'm not weary or nervous, because there's a lot more information out there and more tech to enable a team on. As long as you're creating a system that flows through properly and you're tracking progress, that's totally fine. I also will say, again, like, interestingly enough, on the question of whether or not AI is making SDRs lazier or smarter, I actually have a kind of split weird answer on this. So I don't say lazier, only because I think lazier is more of an aspect of motivation. If you have a team that is increasing efficiency, there should be some measures in place to keep them motivated, to make them want to do more. So technically, if it's lazier, then that just means that from a leadership standpoint, there aren't things in place to kind of drive the results you're looking for. Now, on the flip side, I do actually think it makes them smarter. And the reason why I say that is because with certain kind of technology and AI, you can create more enablement opportunities to actually make someone smarter, right? One of the most important skills of an SDR, of a hiring profile, is this thing called clock speed, or general mental ability. There's a great book out there called Leading Sales Development, where it's like Salesforce, AlphaSense, SalesLoft, they did this extensive study on, like, what makes a great SDR from an intangible standpoint. Now, clock speed in the past was a non-negotiable, because if you had an individual who could not connect what a company does and why they should buy your product, you can teach that, but it takes so much longer. And the hard part about that is you had some individuals who had, like, great grit. They knew that you didn't need a great fit for your company, but they just could not connect the dots quickly. With AI, there is the ability to teach them that clock speed, to teach them the ways to tap into accounts at scale. And a great example of that is we actually tested out this technology earlier. I think it's called Hyperbound, where literally it's AI cold calling, right? So if you have a bot who sits there live with you, we give them the prompt on how to talk to a persona, and they do this cold call training with a bot. And if they're successful, then they push through. If not, then they don't, right? So if you think about that, we're training this bot on a persona, and we're actually literally making the SDR smarter faster because they're taking reps at it. So it's a very weird situation right now where I do think that the role is changing, and the lazier aspect technically can exist if you don't have the right measures in place to motivate your team. But I do think fundamentally they can become smarter if you are mindful of how you're using AI to train your team.
You mentioned some of the measures that that folks should be using, and I know there's a lot of discussion now in terms of evaluating the impact of marketing and what are the right things to measure, and getting rid of the MQL. And which I think is a great conversation to be having. Would you say there's an equivalent conversation then to be had around how SDR teams should be measuring, what they should be paying attention to, and how they should be interpreting that?
Yeah, so the one thing that's been changing over the past couple of years, and it's not quite settled yet, but I don't see this momentum dying down, is SDRs being more involved later on in the sales cycle, right? So traditionally, you've seen teams where their goal SDRs are just booking a meeting with the right person. And then you start seeing situations where it's like, okay, book me with the right person, but I want qualified pipeline. I've even seen examples of teams where once there's qualified pipeline, how are you progressing the deal to later stages of an opportunity? That last part, I've seen a couple of teams, not a lot of teams do that. The majority of what I'm seeing right now is a lot of teams still are goaling their team on qualified pipeline. So in terms of like the SDR function, and I think there's also a question of like, ROI, return, things of that nature. As long as you're moving with the market and you're finding ways to insert the SDRs into the later parts of the process where they can make a very tangible impact to increase sales cycles and increase deal velocity or decrease deal velocity, then there's a viable future, right? So for example, what we do over here, we goal our team on, we call it stage 1s and stage 2s. So stage 1 is essentially a meeting with the right person with a clear next step. And stage 2 is like qualified pipeline. Now, specifically with qualified pipeline, it's not just like, are they serious about talking to us? It's, do you have multiple personas and an opportunity, right? So, and that's a great way where you can task an SDR with, yes, book that first meeting with that one person. But we know, and we all fundamentally know this, the more people you have an opportunity, the faster the deal is, the bigger the deal, et cetera. Go find those additional people, right? You still have the ability to prospect, to use LinkedIn Navigator, to use 6sense to find certain contacts that are engaging with you. find those contacts, let them know what's happening within the deal and invite them into the conversation to increase that deal size. So that specific play we've been running here for a number of years, I'm now seeing examples of that. Even once they get past qualified pipeline, we're having SDRs multi-thread even further to those qualified opportunities to make sure they're adding more value to that. So that's why, again, I don't think the role is going away. It's changing. There's still something about having a dedicated resource to finding people who want to talk to you. And I think as long as the market keeps evolving in the manner, I don't see it going away just purely based upon that.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of interesting things in that last minute or two of kind of trends we've even seen in the industry too, where SDRs have that continuity through the sales cycle, or at least the top of the funnel and a little bit more into the funnel. So the buyer doesn't get this broken experience of a hard handoff, like, okay, you're going to be talking to Sally or Joe on the AE side, and I'm done and I'm off to the next thing. So we've seen that a little bit deeper integration. The other thing that I'd be curious about your perspective on, and I don't know if there's a role for this or not, but oftentimes we see marketers creating all this great account-based strategy and then it falling kind of on deaf ears on the sales side because there's no SDR function, or the SDR function isn't trained to kind of do that translation for the AEs. Are you seeing any value or need in something called like a market development role where they could kind of synthesize all the signals from marketing and kind of deliver it to the sales side? So sales doesn't have to necessarily, I don't want to say think, because they too have an extremely hard job, but they have to think less about the interpretation of the data. And I don't know if that's something you do there or if you've seen in other companies, but I'm curious if you have a point of view on that.
Yeah, so I know Kerry Cunningham has been on the show before, but he did some really great research on this, I want to say earlier this year, on this specific topic, because there's an aspect of like education on the company despite their buying stage and whether or not they're ready to buy, and taking the marketing information to make sure that they're educated properly. So to your point, yes, I would definitely agree with that. I don't have the data from what Kerry did his research on, but there is something about, and again, a lot of what we do here is we use 6NS to identify where accounts are in the buying stage. So we know their likelihood of having a conversation with us. There are still a handful of accounts out there that are not simply ready, but we know where they are on their journey. Having a dedicated resource that understands where they're at, is able to serve them content, educate those buyers before they're ready to have a conversation with us. There's value in that. Obviously, I haven't seen too many teams do that quite yet. I think Kerry is definitely always innovative ahead of times with his research, but I would not be surprised if we start seeing more of that.
And if thinking about kind of an account-based go-to-market, what would you say are ways that you would adjust the role of the SDR when you do have that kind of a focused go-to-market? Any recommendations?
Yeah, I think if you evolve to a model like that, it's going to be more about really understanding accounts at their buying stage. And it's going to be challenging at first for an SDR to not want to try and book the meeting right then and there. But their goal should be off the base of territory and moving accounts down funnel to certain buying stages. So, right, like think of an account that's maybe at target, as we call it here, where they're not ready to have a conversation with us, they're not doing a lot of research. They should be goals on how many accounts within this territory can you move to these later stages to eventually be ready to have a sales team talk to them, right? And again, I haven't seen too many teams do that, and there are a lot of different tools and systems to kind of do that in an automated function. But again, as we always know, that extra personalization from an individual does work really well. So again, I would not be surprised if teams started taking that direction.
Yeah, and thinking about your response from a couple questions ago about the multi-threading, and that too seems to be the rage right now with buyers groups. And as companies are moving more up market, you have to multi-thread. I'm also keeping an eye on time here, so this is probably my last question. But any advice that you would give to companies that might be rooted not in the multi-threading? Perhaps their SDRs are just responsible for getting a meeting with a person. Any advice that you would give to a company to say, hey, look, you got to look beyond that, and here's how you do it?
Sure. So I think in its simplest form, any lead-based team, you must teach your team to multi-thread, right? Especially with a team that's not probably getting demo requests. If you're doing like content downloads, webinars, trade shows, they have to be multi-thread because that's the best way to take advantage of the entire account to bring them to the fold. That's the first thing. The second thing is I still don't think people, I hear the term thrown out so often. I don't think people actually know what it means. Weirdly enough, I think it's a couple different categories, right? So there's account multi-threading, which is like when you're reaching out to an account, finding multiple personas based on engagement to reach out to them and have a conversation. There's opportunity, or there's meeting multi-threading, where it's like, when you do initially book that meeting, how many people are you trying to bring into each meeting? And there's opportunity multi-threading, where when you talk to the actual person, and whether gatekeeping or they're slow or they're not really a mobilizer, how are you trying to corral the rest of their troops into a conversation? So I think first and foremost, like, identify what kind of multi-threading you're focused on, and then based upon that, create plays for it.
Yeah, I appreciate that definition, or that, collection of definitions, because I do think that different companies have different people involved in their deals at different points, and different things that you need to do at different stages of buying, that multi-threading could look different. I'd never really thought of it or articulated it that way. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation. I think that's great. And I mean, as companies are thinking about what to do with their SDR functions, and sort of going towards maybe thinking about having somebody go through a transformation exercise for that part of go-to-market, what are some good ways to diagnose what's working and what isn't? What would you recommend in terms of evaluating your current state and then thinking about how to get to the next phase?
Yeah, sure. So depending on whether you're a lead-based or account-based team, being very mindful of the capacity per rep and building systems to increase that. So if we know that traditionally an SDR can work 100 accounts, what kind of systems are you putting in place through AI, through automation, to increase that number without decreasing the quality? That's the first thing. The second thing, again, is the quality aspect. I think the easiest thing is a lot of teams are still running that playbook of like, I'm sending 500 emails, 80% are going to be automated, 20% are going to be personalized, and taking the steps of like, first and foremost, addressing that. And then once you actually address the volume of personalization, digging into the quality of even the personalization that they're sending, and creating systems in place to make sure they're doing that at scale. The exact same thing with calls. So I think, in short, it's the capacity of activity per rep. Think of that as like emails, calls, accounts, leads are going after. The second thing is definitely the quality of work that they're doing, and looking for ways to scale it out to a point where, very similar to us, where we have an SDR team that is primarily making emails that are almost all personalized at scale with no automation in there. And as I'm thinking through the future with our team, like I'd like to imagine that we could eventually move to a world where that 100 lists that we've generated that has a high hit rate, how can we find a way to get that on all $400 we're making throughout the course of the week? That's how we transform what we're doing. And there's a lot of work involved with that. Sometimes it takes time to do it, but that's what you should be thinking about with the team.
I love your comment about capacity. I think that's often overlooked, particularly by either marketers or non-sales executives. They just kind of overlook that completely and are not thoughtful enough. They come up with these pie in the sky numbers that have nothing to do with the correlation of the capacity of the organization. So love that you're taking that approach. I want to be respectful to your time, Ernest. Any closing thoughts from your side on SDRs that you want to leave us with today?
No, I'll just say the SDR function is not going away yet. I firmly believe that. I think there will always be a place in the market given the work that the teams do. And I think always being mindful, again, it's not just about generating revenue, it's also talent as well. Like, especially now that we see in the market where SDRs have a lot heavier hand down funnel, that's only more of a reason to take these individuals and make them A's in the future.
Gotcha. Well, thank you again for joining us. Meg, any closing thoughts from your side?
Just a big thank you. I think this is an important conversation to be having, especially with so many people sort of talking about the end of the SDR function. Clearly, it's not the answer based on the results that you're generating with your team. So hopefully people are taking some really, really good suggestions for how to maybe think a bit differently about the role, but also not to sort of wash their hands of it, but instead to say, how do we elevate it? So I think that's a great outcome from today. And thank you again for taking the time bright and early to speak with us.
Of course. Thanks for having me too. Appreciate it.
Thanks again, Ernest. And next week, Meg, we've got another special guest joining us at our regular time on your side.
Yes, we do. We have Beth Yahaskell, who people may know from her role of teaching the Winning by Design revenue architecture class on Pavilion, or for Pavilion. And she is doing some really interesting work helping organizations understand how to evaluate their go-to-market, make sure they're doing things the way that they should be for their stage of growth. and kind of what that looks like over time. So stay tuned for more on that, and we'll have a really good poll question to get out for next week. But yeah, I think people will be really interested in some of the observations that Beth has from all the work that she does with speaking with revenue leaders and kind of what's working and what isn't.
Awesome. Well, great. We'll see you at a regular time next week, and thanks again.